But your
And
talent was so raw then. Like one of the comments that I thought was really nice that we got in about that period was someone sent a message in and said they were at the 1979 Nevada City Classic. I'm not sure if you remember this race, but you were still a junior. And apparently that day you won both the junior and the senior race. And then you came back the following year and you lapped the entire field. Like what sort of training were you doing as a junior to be able to stick it up to the Cat 1s like that? How much was nature versus nurture?
Nature. I mean, nature. It's genetics. I think it's genetics. But I grew up in a really great area for bike riding. But I won my first 12 races, and then. But I think what's interesting for me, and I think maybe I don't know, might explain maybe why not capitulating to doping. Some people might. Winning wasn't my real. I loved winning, but if I think back to I was 14 years old and I won my first 11 races, and I asked permission from the governing officials if I could get permission to race with the junior category, which was 15 to 18, and I was the first rider ever to get permission for that. But juniors had a 53, 15, 53 chain ring, 15 in the back, and the intermediate had a 47 or 45, 15. I can't remember. It's 45, 15, much smaller gear. But I never won another race that year. But I was so excited. I was second in Nevada City that year. My highlight of that year was we did a mountain type, was like a point A to point B up Mount Tamalpais, which is Marin County famous. That's where mountain biking started, but it's a 2,600 foot climb. And George Mount, who was sixth in the Olympics that year, we broke away and he couldn't drop me. And if I would have had the junior gears, I think I would have won it because it was not on the hill finish. But that was the highlight. I mean, it was really like, oh my gosh, that was a huge, for me, an athletic achievement because I was just 15 years old and he was sixth in the Olympics, world-class racer. So that was kind of a sign. Then the following year was my first year junior. And again, I won most every race I entered. I don't know if I got permission that year to race with the senior Olympic level, but I know that year I was racing in a race with John Howard at that time. And John Howard's a stage race, 3-day stage race in Fresno. And I broke away with him and we were minutes in front of everybody. And this guy he really was one of the top. I mean, I think if he was racing in the 80s, 90s, he would have been a really good pro. But he was, I don't know how many times national champ, Pan American champion, 3-time been on the Olympics. But in the time trial, I was 20 seconds up on him, but I turned around. It was like a 30-mile-an-hour tailwind. I spun out and he beat me by 10 seconds. But that was my first year. And the following year, I asked permission to go to the amateur Olympic. I call it amateur. That was after 18 years old older. That would be the top category in the U.S. But I won most of my races there. But I think it was interesting for me when I started racing, it was all these, Northern California especially really was into the traditional road racing. They knew all the European racers but there was this kind of mystique about the European races. Eddie Merckx was at its prime or just coming at the end of it, and Freddie Martins and all these great classic riders. And, I started looking at all the magazines, Miroir de Cyclisme, and it's just sparked an imagination. But at the time, I just know that it was like, man, nobody, it'd be a dream to even think about competing against them. Now, there were a few riders, a guy named Mike Neal, who was quite a good rider. He did well, 10th place in the World Championships. And he was an early pioneer. And he went to Europe and got turned pro with an Italian team. And George Mount, again, he was a really early, really good racer that was sixth in the Olympics. He went and turned a couple years later before I turned pro with an Italian team. But
so
it
how did
still
you make
was
that
like,
jump though? You're saying with the Italian team, like how do you? Because
no,
it's a long way
go,
still. Like,
I didn't go to Italian. I didn't go to the Italian team. I'm saying George Mount.
Oh, okay, sorry. So
Mike
how did you
Neal,
make your jump to Europe?
Well, I'm still a junior, so I'm just talking about my junior period. So I started 14 and a half, and so I've got 3 years as a junior. And at that time, there were some early pioneers, Mike Neal and George Mount.
Okay.
But I'm saying the mentality in America is that Americans could never compete in Europe. Now, the guy that I lined up in 1976 and Tassajara road race was the guy that looked at me with disgust, Kent Gordis. We became really great friends. And his dad lived in Switzerland. His mom lived in Berkeley, but Kent was, I don't know, he graduated from Yale at 16. He spoke Russian, French fluently, probably German and English, of course. And he still is like the historian. He knows everything about cycling, every statistic. I mean, he educated me on, so much about Europe. But in 78, 1978, I did the world champ. Well, actually, this is I kind of forget this race, but the Junior World Championships were in Washington, D.C. in 1978, which was a big deal. Nobody had a World Championships. And my first coach was a guy named Eddie Borisevich. He defected after the 76 Olympics. He ended up becoming the national coach. And his focus was on junior racers. He felt like that's where you develop the talent. And our focus was on team time trial training. And he was the first guy. I mean, if I think back, he implemented real interval training for juniors. I mean, I knew, Eastern Bloc type of training methods at 16, 17 years old. We ended up getting a bronze medal in the team time trial behind East Germans. And I forgot, they won it, Russia second. And I got ninth place in the road race. And that was kind of like, a big deal for me. And I did it on a broken saddle. So that was my first international competition. And it's like, okay. But Eddie B, the coach, he gave us he believed that we were world class. He called me a diamond in the rough. You're like a, rare diamond, but needs to be polished. But that summer, just after the World Championships, I flew to Europe with Kent Gordis, and he took his mom and his brother and Kent and we stayed at his dad's place in Switzerland for July, but he drove me to a race outside of Zurich, and then one near Crans-Montana, which had all the best Swiss riders, and I won both those races. And then I raced 2 races in France, one near Annecy, one near Chambéry-Chalizoux, and I won both those races. And then, and then because Belgium was the place to go, that was the school of cycling. And Kent Gordis, and even at that time, I knew about Belgium. We went up there for 3 weeks, and I entered 6 or 8 races. I think I won all 6 or 8 races. So every race I entered, I won. And I'm racing not in America, I'm racing in Europe with the best people. And Eddie Merckx, this is where my logic started coming in. I'm going, okay, these guys are gods, and they're so talented. We don't have the ability to compete. Well, all these great riders have to start as a junior. Eddie Merckx had to start off as a junior. And if I'm as good as anybody in Europe at this time, why can't I think about the Tour de France? And it was that trip that I first saw the Tour de France, a stage up the Jouplan into Morzine. And that was like, oh my God, that was the most amazing thing to see. And at the end of my 2-month trip, Eddie Borisevich, his nickname was Eddie B, his abbreviated with a B instead of, nobody could pronounce his last name. He had arranged for me and another American rider to fly to Poland and do an international stage race. It's a 3-day race in southern Poland. There was Czechoslovakia at the time, Eastern Bloc countries, East Germans. So I had a little piece of paper in a pencil with an address on it and a name. And the friend that was supposed to go, the other rider that was supposed to go, ended up going home to the U.S. I didn't know that, and I showed up at the airport in Brussels myself, and I flew to Warsaw, and I had $75 on me. I had a bike and 4 sets of wheels and a suitcase. And, at that time, there's no phones. And I flew over to Warsaw, landed there, and, walk out expecting somebody to pick me up. And I sit there and nobody's picking me up. An hour goes by, 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by, nobody's there. And I'm going, what do I do? I got a fixed ticket, leaves in a week. And I didn't think if I could just go change it. I probably could have, but I didn't have a credit card or anything. So I'm sitting there, and I finally, I still remember going to buy Coca-Cola, and, I felt like a fish out of water, but I walk and it breaks and the whole airport stops and stares at me. I probably was a little more self-conscious. So I went out to the taxi cab drivers, and I told them this is Łódź, just a town that the address is Łódź, WGZ. And They asked for $80 in cash to take me down there. And I said, I don't have it. So I went back in, I came back and I negotiated a guy for $25 and he took me down. But and that was like an hour and a half, 2 hour drive. And then we spent an hour and a half driving around Woods to find the address. And then we finally got to the address. I knock on the door and I look, this woman answered. I go, Greg LeMond, Eddie B. And she goes like, I don't understand anything. And I said, Eddie Budasevich. Okay. But she wouldn't call her husband, who was the national track coach. They called Eddie B, and Eddie B forgot to call him. So I completely forgot I was there. And so anyway, I ended up spending a week there, and it was really incredible to be in Eastern Europe. I mean, at the time, I ate like they treated me like royalty. But I remember going to purchase bread with the wife to meet, and it was really like you read about. It was like an hour in the bread line, an hour in the meat line. And anyways, I went down into this race in southern Poland. I'd say the accommodations were horrendous. And one thing I'd never really grew up liking, I could drink milk with cereal, but just plain milk. And the breakfast was warm milk and noodles. And I could not eat it. So I went 3 days with no breakfast. But anyways, I ended up, I won the first stage. I ended up taking the lead, then I crashed, and I ended up, I think, getting third place overall. But I came back from that trip going, okay, I was very goal-oriented. I've always been, and I'm going, okay, I think I have the talent to go to the Tour de France.
So if you like this video, you should definitely check out this video because I know you're going to love it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel.